James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came forward to Jesus and said to him, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you." And Jesus said to them, "What is it you want me to do for you?" And they said to him, "Grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory." But Jesus said to them, "You do not know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" And they replied, "We are able." Then Jesus said to them, "The cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism with which I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or at my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those for whom it has been prepared." When the 10 heard this, they began to be angry with James and John. So Jesus called them and said to them, "You know that among the Gentiles, those whom they recognize as their rulers lord it over them, and their great ones are tyrants over them. But it is not so among you. But whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wishes to be first among you must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many." This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
I know growing up, I always looked up to certain people. One of the people I looked up to, of course, was John Wayne. Anybody that grew up in our era, the Duke was the man. And I think that it is good to have heroes like that, because especially somebody that embodied not only the persona he had, that was a real persona. A lot of what you saw on the screen was the way he acted in real life. For him, it was God, country, family. And he really believed that. And he lived his life out. There was no doubt, whether you saw him on the street, whether you saw him on a talk show, or whether he was in a movie, what you saw is what you got. That was the man that he was. And I think that was the sign of his greatness. Not so much because he was a movie star, but because he put his beliefs into action. And that is what Jesus calls us to do. It's what he called his disciples to do all those years ago. His disciples, of course, walked along with Jesus as he would teach, but we have the benefit of all of his teachings and also the teachings of the disciples. So we have a couple rungs up on those guys. Because Jesus had been teaching them about servanthood, and he had been serving others, and yet they still didn't quite grasp all of that. They had one of the greatest teachers, one of the greatest shepherds. They had the Son of God right there with them, and yet they weren't getting it all. They saw what he was doing, they heard his words, but it just wasn't coming all together. They had selective hearing, kind of like whenever my wife calls me. For some reason, that frequency, it's the only one I can't hear. I mean, she can be in a room next to me, and I just don't hear her. And I think the disciples were that way too, because the only thing they heard from Jesus was, "Ask me for anything, and I will grant it to you." The other stuff, right over their heads. The stuff about being servants. He said that more than once. talking about being the least as being the greatest. They were out to lunch for that. But they heard the part about, if you ask for anything in my name, I will grant it to you. And so James and John, the sons of Zebedee, figured, hey, let's get in on the ground floor here. Jesus is talking about a kingdom to come, and hey, we've been following him faithfully. Even when everybody else fell away, those multitudes that he fed, we hung in there with them. So let's now make sure that we have our place assured. So they said, Jesus, we have a request for you. You told us we can come to you and ask for anything, so here it is. And Jesus said, okay, what do you want? And of course they said, we want to sit at either your right hand or your left hand in your glory. Well, Jesus did tell them to ask. And yet Jesus looked at them, and I think Jesus had to be looking at them in great love, because otherwise his reply would have been surely different. I would have been minus 2 more disciples after that day. But I think Jesus looked at them and loved them, because he then said, are you able to drink from the cup that I must drink from? Are you able to be baptized in the baptism in which I will be baptized? Now that may seem like a silly question to us, because we all know that at the beginning of his ministry, he was baptized in the River Jordan by John. Why would he talk about baptism again? Well, it's connected with what he was speaking about drinking from that cup. Because if we remember the nights that he was in the Garden of Gethsemane and he went to pray, when he prayed so hard that it said that blood started pouring from his head. And what did he say? Father, if there is any way, take this cup from me, but whatever you will, let it be done. You see, that was the cup that he was referring to when he was speaking to his disciples. It wasn't just going to be about a cup as we will use today, when we once again receive that visible word, when we drink that wine and eat that wafer. That was not the cup that Jesus was referring to. Rather, Jesus was referring to the cup that God had given to him, that he must drink from. Are you willing to do that, is what he was asking. And then he asked him about the baptism. And let me read you something from Luke, the 12th chapter. Jesus says, I have a baptism to be baptized with, and how I am constrained until it is accomplished. You see, that baptism was going to be him hanging on the cross. That was going to be the fruition of all that he came to do. So what he was asking these disciples was, are you ready to die? Are you ready to die in the name of God? Are you ready to give up your lives so that others might live? Because that's what I'm going to do. Of course, the disciples did not understand, because right away they said, yep, sign me up, I'm ready. And that's when, of course, the other 10 finally caught on to what was going on, and they started to complain. It says they got angry with John and James. It doesn't say why. I kind of think it's because they just didn't think about it quick enough. Let's face it, I grew up in a family where there were 3 boys. There was competition all over the place. You always wanted to be first, because usually it meant you were going to get something. The other 10 didn't happen to come up with the question of the day, and so they were bummed out and mad at the other 2 for even asking it. But Jesus sat them all down, and he began to speak. He said that you know how it is with the foreigners in this land, and he was speaking about the Romans. He was speaking about the hierarchy of the Romans. You know, you have a Roman soldier, and that Roman soldier has authority over the people. That if a Roman soldier tells you to do something, you do it, where you pay the price. But then you had a centurion who was in charge of a group of soldiers. And whatever the centurion said, the soldiers had to do. So he was much higher than the common person. And then, of course, you had somebody who was in charge of the legion. And in that legion, there were many centurions. And then you had the governor. And then above the governor was the emperor. And, of course, the emperor loved to lord it over all people. But all of the people in Jesus' day that had any power, they lorded it over you. They could do anything they wanted to you. They could call you any name they wanted to. They could kick you out of a seat that they wanted because you were in a lower position of status than they were. They could come into your house. Nothing you could do. Jesus was saying, that's how it is here on earth, but that's not how it is in God's kingdom. In God's kingdom, it's the other way around. The least shall be first, shall be greatest. The ones who are rich and powerful here on earth, well, they're going to find out. Things are going to change really quick. And Jesus, of course, himself was the great example. That he came in the world not to be served, but to serve. And everywhere he went, people would come up and bring others who wanted to be healed. And there are many times in the scriptures we see that Jesus had compassion upon these people. Yes, he was God, but he was also human. And there were times that he was tired, and there were times that he wanted to take some time out with his disciples to go up a mountain, maybe just to have a retreat, to get away. And yet, when he saw all these people, he knew that he must once again be a servant. That he would touch them and heal them. He would pray over them. He would make the blind see, the lame walk. He would make the deaf hear. He would even raise some people from the dead. And all of this he did for the glory of God. Not for his own glory, but everything was always done for the glory of God the Father. And that is what Jesus was showing his disciples. And that's what Jesus is showing us today. That this is how we are to live. That yes, in this world it's very competitive, and yes, there's nothing wrong with trying to be the best at what you are, whether it be at work, whether it be at play. But we must remember where our citizenship truly lies, and that is not here on earth, but in God's kingdom. And in God's kingdom, the economy is much different than ours. Instead of storing up earthly treasures that will rot away, we are to store up heavenly treasures. That if we follow God's example in Jesus Christ, we then become the servants of others. And God gives us many opportunities throughout our days to come in contact with those who are in need, who are hurting, who may need some of our time. And it is there that we are given the opportunity to become servants, to do that will of God and to do it lovingly and with grace. I was reading through a biography It was a woman that grew up as an aristocrat in Hungary, and she wanted to be an actress in Hollywood. Of course, she had the means and the money so that she could come over here, and she did just that. She got into some movies, but she met the great director Otto Preminger, and she married him. And she got sucked up into this life of Hollywood with all of the lights, the glitz, the glamour, and pretty soon everybody else were the common people. They lead a very different life in LA. My son has clued me in as to how they live out in LA. I would not want to be there. Some have no clue as to how the real world functions anymore. And so she finally decided that that wasn't for her. She divorced Otto Preminger and went back to Europe. And there she met a man named Albert Schweitzer. And Albert Schweitzer was very different. Number one, he loved music just like she did. But most importantly, Albert Schweitzer's main concern, his main goal in this world was to help all of the people on the continent of Africa. That's where he put all of his resources and most of his time. In her autobiography, she wrote, in fact, the cover of the jacket is, "I wanted everything." And she even states that in the book. I wanted everything. But it wasn't until I was willing to give up everything that I could have everything. In her obituary, she used words that were from Schweitzer. She said that in life there are two types of people, the helpers and the non-helpers. And I am a helper. And that's what God calls us to be, isn't it? If we boil it down to the simplest terms, God says, be a helper. In whatever small way you can, whatever large way you can, be a helper. Because we know there are plenty of people that truly do need help in this world for many different reasons. And we are God's helpers. We have the greatest example that anyone could ever have in Jesus Christ. And if we but follow that example as we live out our lives, we will soon find that servanthood is not only a noble calling, but it is something that affords us the greatest gifts of all. Because I can't tell you how many times after I've been blessed to be able to help people out, no matter what their circumstances, when they look in your eyes and they say thank you, or they just hug in your arms, and the tears are running down their face. Well, let me tell you something. That changes lives. Not only theirs either. It makes you really want to become a true servant of God. And that is what I pray for each and every one of us.